And so Joseph died. He had lived to be 110 years old. They took his body, they embalmed it, placed it in a coffin, and laid him to rest in Egypt. Hiya, welcome to today's devotional. As you may have guessed, we're right at the end of the book of Genesis, and what I've just read is verse 26, the final verse. But you know, if that was Joseph's epitaph, if that's all we ever knew about his life, it wouldn't tell us very much, would it? It wouldn't give us much insight into the fact that he almost died so many times, that he kind of came back from the dead, really, and was enabled by God to save not just the nation of Egypt, but his own nation of Israel and other nations that surrounded them in the time of famine. Not only that, but it led to the abolition of Israel's slavery eventually, and that's an astounding thing because it's so similar to where I'm stood right now and the legacy that we have of the man who sat once on this bench with William Pitt, who became Prime Minister, yet William Wilberforce. And he has the legacy, and it's written in his epitaph, that he brought an end to slavery in the UK and the colonies of this world. And we know all about that story. But right here, this bench I've visited many times because it's not far from where we all live. And right here is where he decided, after the discussion with William Pitt, that he must see this through. He must get it through Parliament. He must get this law passed to abolish slavery throughout the known world at that time. And his epitaph is incredible, so similar, it almost could pass for the one of Joseph. I'll read some of it. It says, "He was among the foremost of those who fixed the character of their times." This is William Wilberforce. It goes on to explain how he was a Christian man, how he trusted in the power of God, just as Joseph had done. And he goes on to say he removed from England the guilt of the African slave trade and prepared the way for the abolition of slavery in every colony of the empire, in the prosecution of those objects he relied on. But he relied not in vain, but on God. But in the process he was called to endure great opposition. He outlived, however, all enmity, and in the evening of his days withdrew from public life and public observation to the bosom of his family, yet he died not unnoticed or forgotten by his country. I mean, that could almost pass word for word for the epitaph or the legacy that Joseph would have left to his nation also. And it's an amazing thing that up here, as I look across the hillside that I showed you at the beginning, there is almost a view out to eternity. And you know, these guys that established so much almost had a view of eternity. They were working not just for their time, they were working for eternity. They were working to see God's purpose established, not just in their own time, in their own lifetime, but for eternity. They wanted to make their dash, the dash between the date they were born and the date they died, matter. They wanted to see that moment in time, moment in the world's history, matter. And I wonder today, as we look at the end of the life of Joseph, how we trust God. You know, Joseph heard God right at the beginning of his life. In his young days, he had those dreams that set him up, not only for great opposition and great trial, but also, as he said later in his life, that God meant all those trials for good. And actually, at the end, it says right here, just as it says about William Wilberforce, Joseph's life, the most of we hear about it is when he was younger. God really worked through him in his young years and in his middle years. But as he got older, you know, I don't know, it says he went to live with his family, and eventually they buried him. But he enjoyed a long life, and he left such a legacy that in the book of Hebrews, in that famous chapter 11, it's written of him that he had faith to the end. And it says, by faith, he instructed the people of Israel. You notice I said, when I read verse 26 in Genesis 50, it doesn't say they buried him. It just says they put his bones in a coffin. Do you know what they did with those bones? They carried them, according to his instruction, into the land of Israel, the land that God had promised them. And they entered that land 400 years later. That's faith for you. Joseph knew that was going to happen. He knew God would come through on his promises. And I wonder, as we contemplate our lives today, what kind of an epitaph we're going to leave